So how much does a gestational carrier get paid anyway? If you're thinking about growing your family through surrogacy, you've probably asked this question. Well, in this video, we're going to talk about just that. So let's talk about gestational carriers and their compensations. In this video, we're going to cover altruistic surrogacy versus compensated surrogacy. We're going to cover what factors affect compensated surrogacy, and we're also going to talk about the logistics around a surrogate's pay or compensation. Let's jump into it. I'm Corlandos Scott, and I'm an assisted reproduction attorney in Los Angeles, California, and my entire career is built around making sure that we have documents and contracts in place that, if nothing else, address the issue of compensation. So stick around and let's talk about it. So when we're talking about a gestational carrier or surrogate's compensation, the first thing we have to make sure of is if it's an altruistic surrogacy arrangement or a commercial or a compensated surrogacy arrangement. In an altruistic surrogacy arrangement, there is no compensation to speak of. Now, that doesn't mean that the surrogate doesn't get reimbursed for expenses or the cost of doing the surrogacy process, but it means that she's not getting some type of base pay on a monthly basis solely for carrying the baby for another couple or individual. However, in a compensated surrogacy arrangement, it's just that. The surrogate, or the gestational carrier, if you will, is being compensated for the time, the effort, the energy, the pain, the inconvenience of doing all the things it takes to be pregnant, to get pregnant, and to deliver a baby for the intended parents or parent. So let's talk about what factors affect compensated or commercial surrogacy. In a commercial or compensated surrogacy arrangement, there are a lot of factors that play into things. First of all, the state that you're doing surrogacy in. Depending on which state your surrogate lives in, the base compensation could be anywhere from $25,000 as a base compensation all the way to $45,000, $50,000, $60,000, or $70,000 for the compensation for the surrogate. Another factor that matters is the experience of the surrogate. Now, a first-time surrogate demands a lower compensation rate than a proven or experienced surrogate. And that makes sense, right? If you're working with someone who you know knows how to do this, they've done it in the past, and they can show positive results, then yeah, it's going to cost a little bit more to work with that surrogate than with a new, or what we would say, unproven surrogate. But I wouldn't let that make you shy away from choosing a first-time surrogate. Because remember, in order to qualify as a surrogate in the first place, you have to at least have had one successful, trouble-free pregnancy and delivery in the past, and you also have to get medically screened beforehand. So just because it's her first time doesn't mean you should overlook her. The next factor that plays into a surrogate's compensation is whether she's carrying a singleton pregnancy or what we call a multiples pregnancy. Now, a multiples pregnancy is anything more than a singleton pregnancy. So that's twins, triplets, quadruplets, heavens forbid, quintuplets or octomom status. Of course, the more fetuses a woman is carrying, the higher the risk that pregnancy is. So the compensation should reflect the amount of risk that the surrogate is taking on for you. So if you have a surrogate who is carrying multiples, then it's likely that your contract or that her compensation package would dictate that if she gets pregnant with multiples, the compensation will rise. So the key is making sure you know what that rise should equal. So you're not caught off guard and you know, if my surrogate gets pregnant with a singleton baby, this will be the compensation amount. If by chance she gets pregnant with multiples, this will be the compensation amount. But at any rate, it shouldn't be a surprise to you. And a good agency and a good attorney will help make sure that you're not surprised. One of the other factors that affects a surrogate's compensation is really you. Yeah, you. You affect the surrogate's compensation. And what I mean by that is, what do you require of your surrogate throughout the course of the pregnancy? For instance, I worked with a set of parents who were going through the surrogacy process and they only wanted their surrogate to eat organic food. So it cost a little bit more for them because they opted to provide her with a monthly food stipend in order to purchase organic food. Now, we made sure that we did it in a safe way, so they purchased a grocery cart for her each month. But all that to say, it cost them more because of what they wanted and what they valued in the pregnancy. So like that, many parents have relocation requirements. They want the surrogate to reside in a certain place throughout the pregnancy. They also have counseling requirements. They want the surrogate to be availed of mental health professionals and therapy and counseling as she goes through the process. I've even had parents that wanted their surrogate to get a prenatal massage. I was like, great idea. You think you can throw one in for the attorney? Well, listen, at the end of the day, it's up to you. What all do you want your surrogacy process to look like? That may factor into what the compensation or what the cost of the surrogacy process will be for you. Even with all these factors, none of this should be a surprise to you after you start the process. So, at the very beginning of the process, once you match with the surrogate, one of the things you consider when you're matching, especially if you're matching with an agency, is something that we call the benefits package. This is a short document that outlines every piece of the surrogate's compensation and all of the financial requirements that you're responsible for. So that short benefits package should talk about what her base compensation is, whether there's a meal allowance, whether there's a monthly allowance, whether she's reimbursed for mileage, whether or not she gets a rental car for long distance travel if she needs to travel on your behalf to visit a specialist or a doctor. All those things should be spelled out in that benefits package so that when you choose to match with that surrogate, you already know the costs, and now you simply need for your attorney to take that benefits package and create the long form contract. So make sure that whatever the cost for your surrogacy will be, you know it before you sign on. Now, before we get to the last point, if you're watching this and you're curious about the surrogacy process, maybe you're wondering, well, how can I become a surrogate? Make sure you subscribe to our channel and you can see my video on how to become a surrogate. Or maybe you're a hopeful parent watching and you're wondering, how do I choose the right surrogate? Be sure to subscribe and you can go back and watch my video on how to choose the right surrogate for you. Well, let's jump into that third point. Let's talk about the logistics of a surrogate's pay and compensation. Now, in compensating a surrogate, it's not just writing her a check at the end of the week and dropping it off at her house. There's a very specific way that you should go about compensating your surrogate so that you are protected and she is protected. Now, some states have this coded out in their laws. For instance, in California, the money for the surrogacy process must be placed in an escrow account prior to the surrogate undergoing her embryo transfer. Although it's not required by all states to put the money into a separate escrow account, I think it's wise to do that. For the surrogate, she gets comfort in knowing that, God forbid, if anything happened to the parents and I'm 3 or 4 months pregnant, I know that there's money set aside to take care of the rest of the pregnancy-related expenses. If you're the parent, it's smart and it's wise to do it, and you get comfort in knowing that the money is safe and that there's no entity that can run off with your money, even the surrogate or the agency. The reason that California put that law into effect is because there were some problems with certain agencies. There were agencies that were telling parents that certain things cost one amount and they really cost half that amount and they just pocket the rest. And so California did away with agencies being able to hold your money and said there has to be a separate escrow account by an attorney in their trust account or by a licensed bonded escrow company. So even if you're not in California, you might want to consider that. Now we know the money is in a separate account at this point, but how does the surrogate get it? Well, one of the things that if you're working with an agency, that agency should be doing is keeping the escrow company apprised of where you are in the process. So every month they should be making payment requests on behalf of the surrogate. And what the good escrow company or the attorney who's holding the money in trust for you should do is compare that request against the contract to make sure that the payment that the surrogate is asking for is valid and allowed in the contract. And when they line up, then the attorney that's holding that money or the escrow company can write that check. The reason why the attorney is holding it or an escrow company is holding it in most cases is because an attorney can lose their license if they're playing fast and loose with your money. The same way an escrow could lose its bonded and licensed status if it is not abiding per the terms of how it's holding the money. So make sure to protect yourself, protect the surrogate, and make sure everything is done decently and in order in your surrogacy journey. The last logistic of how surrogates get paid is this. For the base compensation, most of it comes out in monthly increments. So if the surrogate's base compensation is $40,000, she doesn't get a check for $40,000 right up front. Remember I mentioned that the pay is not for a baby. The pay is for the surrogate undergoing all the time, the effort, the pain, the inconvenience. So she's getting paid on a schedule that matches the amount of time she's undergoing that pain, that inconvenience, all of the things that she needs to do to make sure that she's carrying your baby in a healthy way. So when month 1 rolls around, she gets paid for that month. When the next month rolls around, she gets paid for that month. And up to a certain point, if the surrogate were to deliver and stop being a surrogate, then those base compensation payments would stop. Because after all, at that point, she's no longer carrying a baby and no longer serving as a surrogate. However, most agencies require, most benefits packages dictate, and just most people undergoing the process just out of industry standards say there is kind of the point of no return or the point where the surrogate has done everything she can physically do. So a lot of contracts will detail that around the 28th or 30th or 32nd week of the pregnancy, if she delivers after that point, she would get the entirety of that base compensation amount. Now, none of these things are hard and fast. Your journey could be different from the person beside you. So make sure when you're going through this process, you talk to your attorney, you talk to your agencies, talk to your team, and make sure you understand exactly how payments to your surrogate are going to work. Now, I mentioned team, but there's also 2 more T's that I think are foundational to the surrogacy process. And if you click the link below, you can go to my free training on the 3 T's of surrogacy. Now, the 3 T's is my framework for a successful surrogacy journey. It consists of the first T that you already know, team, but it also talks about terms, and last but not least, tact. You need all 3 to have a successful surrogacy journey. And if you want to know the 3 T's and how to utilize them to have a successful surrogacy journey and grow your family the easy way without losing sleep, time, and money, make sure you click the link below and get that free training.